Welcome, travelers. I'm Josh.
And I'm Lee Wanika, and this is Tabletop Journeys, where we will be your not so humble guides on the quest for RPG adventures.
All right, welcome everybody back to our discussion of the 2024 DMG. Joined as always with friends and compatriots and co-hosts, Mr. Michael Ross, Mr. Lee Wanika Miller. Gentlemen, how are you? I hope that things are well. We have a lot to cover with Chapter 4, so keep your comments brief, Lee Wanika.
So I'm doing well. I'm done.
That's good. That's good.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm wounded. Actually, I'm doing quite well. Excited to be here. Excited to talk DMG. Really looking forward to it.
I'm surprised you didn't give me 7 synonyms for wounded. who are you? Right. So anyway, yeah. So tonight we're talking.
Are you asking for that?
No, I am not.
Okay, but I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Creating Adventures chapter 4 in the 2024 DMG. And I definitely have thoughts. I definitely have comments about this. But I want to hear from you guys first. Lunica, since I was giving you crap about never saying anything in 10 words when you could say it in 25, what do you think about chapter 4?
The irony of me starting chapter 4 with me is the fact that my notes on this were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words long, and I'll just read them right off the header of the page. Good advice on ending a campaign. I really like that section. Correction, that's a different chapter.
Yeah.
Let me go back to it.
That's chapter 5.
That's chapter 5. We'll come back to that. So yeah, that one was short. Chapter 4 was interesting, and it brings us back to that conversation we had in our earlier episodes about the DMG, is who is this for? The new GM, the veteran GM, the very long in the tooth GM, and while there are lots of little nuggets of good information that I will definitely be able to go back to, and we'll get into those, I'm sure. And I think for that reason, really cool, even for a veteran or long in the tooth kind of GM. But I do think it's pretty useful for newer GMs, if for no other reason, to get a sense of the structure. Is it perfect? Is it perfection? Probably not. But it's a sense of the structure. It's kind of like as an English major when you first learn about the rising falling action and all of that. Like when you get that first basic outline of a 3-act story structure, and then you get later on 6 months later or the next class in 102, you get the 5-act story structure. That 5-act story structure is useless if you didn't understand the 3.
The 3-act.
Yep. And I think this does a really good job of providing that framework, that basic 3-act, without doing the real technical English major terms, but good gaming knowledge at a base level to get started. And I really love the little mini starting adventures that they showed.
Yeah.
They're not quite one pagers. I don't know what it looks like on the actual page. They're fairly short when I'm reading it digitally. I really liked it. I think this is a really good chapter and very useful for the DMG. I'm interested to see how this translates with other 5e core books and see how they do a similar thing.
Yeah. How about you, Michael? What do you think?
So overall, I did like it. There's a couple things in here that I really, really liked. And to touch on a lot what Lee Wanika said, sorry. I am also having to remind myself, this book is not for me. This book is for someone who is super brand new. And I think even more so than maybe in earlier editions, because you have this influx of people who maybe watched Critical Role or someone similar, very popular Dimension 20, decide they want to play. And so it's not like someone who's played for 10 years as a player who now wants to be a DM. You have people who have never played at all and are now being asked to DM. And I think for that person, this does a lot right, but then it oddly takes some weird shortcuts too, which I find weird. So you do have examples, which I love. I talked about that before. I thought there should have been more examples. We have some examples, but the examples are for people who know what they're doing. Like you get to the, the sample adventures, the fouled stream on page 122. It is like 5 paragraphs. There are no stats in here. There's no combat maps, which I don't use combat maps anyways. But if I was a brand new DM, that's not helpful to me. I don't feel like, I think me as a GM or, Michael, I could go, oh, this is actually a pretty cool adventure. I could run this at a convention, no problem. If no one has ever ran a game before, I don't think this is enough for them to run this adventure. It's like, it's the outline, not the actual adventure. So I would love a book full of these, but it needs a little more meat if this is actually for someone who doesn't know what they're doing yet. So I like a lot of it. The ranges, like local heroes, level 1 to 4, heroes of the realm 5 to 10. I love that. The D20 tables of adventures, love this. But when we get to the actual example, it's not a good example of how to actually run the game. It's a good example of an adventure. It's not a good example of how to run this if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with the scope of the chapter, right? The scope of the chapter is about creating the adventures. In theory, chapters 2 and 3 were about running the game.
Yes.
Right? So this is more just like, now that you know how to run a game, here's some fruit to go ahead and put on those vines that we have now cleverly given you. Much like Lewanika, my comments on the overall impression of the chapter were very short. I thought that this was the most useful chapter in the book up till this point. Because again, I thought that from my perspective as a seasoned DM, chapters 2 and 3 had some stuff that I could see would be useful to people who were not me, but did not have an awful lot of information that I found useful. This chapter, however, I was able to go through stuff that I am writing for my table. I'm running a game with brand new players. There are some things that if I'm playing with experienced players that I can go ahead and hand wave and it's okay because they know the aesthetic, right? They know the environment that we're being created and everything like that. With brand new players, I'm finding that you have to be a little bit more explicit. And so this was a good reminder of like, oh, right, these are the kind of things that I need to go ahead and hit home if not only if I were a newer DM, but also for newer players for them to get what's happening here. I thought was really, really well done. I also thought that the way that they retooled the encounter building to be very, very effective. The 2014 version of the encounter builder got a lot of grief that I thought was unfounded and unfair. I thought this time around that the encounter building was really, really good. And this episode doesn't come out until after the first class warfare chapter comes out. But the class warfare, the druid encounters that I drew up for that were based on this encounter calculation, not the 2014 calculation. So it works. I think it works really, really well, which is nice. I will say that what you were talking about, the examples, Michael, in the encounter building, the high difficulty encounter for 6 15th level characters with 2 adult red dragons and 2 fire giants. I pulled a Lewanika. It scared the crap out of me. So that's
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, I was thinking about that. I was like, 2 adult red dragons and 2 fire giants. Okay, cool. I see how this is going to go. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I speaking about encounters, I think in the encounter builder, the only thing that made 2014 encounter building useful for me as a game master was to utilize the D&D Beyond beta encounter builder. Like, I could just pick a character that sounded good and see where it landed and then go from there. And then once I learned that you have to peg a little higher than what they would tell you, then I could make encounters work. And I know that was built on the math of that system, but I found the math of that system unfathomable in 2014. I am interested to see when they say that D&D Beyond is now, their encounter builder is now switched over to the 2024 math. But I don't believe that'll happen until probably after the monster manual comes out. But I am looking forward to that day.
So
I found other encounter builders, and not to sidetrack us too much, to be good from a mathematical standpoint, but they were not great from a GUI interface. I could interact with it quickly, rapidly on the fly and make it work. And just the benefit of having the encounter builder in D&D Beyond where my VTT players were, and that seamless integration where all my initiative tracking, all the hit point tracking, and automatic die rolls were. I basically had one page one set of data coming in and out of my ancient old computers, and it was much easier to maneuver. But building something or developing an idea and then picking the characters, and that was something that I did do quite frequently. So I couldn't do it on the fly well with Kobold, but I could plan ahead or plan a written adventure that way, and I found that to be kind of useful. And I'm interested to see how TOV does that as well in comparison. But again, we got to wait till like February before, or maybe longer, before everything is in place here, so we actually have the ability to compare which would work best at my tables.
Yep.
And we've already ran into a little bit of that with our class warfare, where the animals aren't actually available yet because we're using different versions of the game.
Yeah.
So I understand from a business standpoint that you don't want to roll out all 3 core books same day, because it's easier to get people to pay for it piecemeal. But
Sure.
the game kind of isn't working until we have all 3. And I almost feel like it should have been Player's Handbook, Monsters Manual, and then DMG would have been the order I would have released them.
Exactly the way Kobold Press did theirs. They did those 2 books came out together. They waited a month and a half and then did the DMG.
Yep.
Makes sense.
And had adventures along the way.
And I don't want to, again, go too far into this, but I do want to ask, just as a point of interest. So on page 105, the first page of chapter 4, it basically lays out a 4-step process on how to build an adventure. Step 1, lay out the premise. Step 2, draw in the players. Step 3, plan the encounters. And step 4, bring it all to an end, or bring it to an end. I just want to ask, and you can elaborate as much or as little as you want, Josh, is that how you build an adventure? And I don't mean like you, I mean you personally, when you build an adventure, does it follow that progression?
So the one that, so do I lay out the premise of what I want the adventure to be at least on an overall level? Yeah, I do. But I also, I am not like a slave to the grind either on that one, right? It's like that's going to change. I think about, we're writing an adventure for Kraken Week that happened last week, right? And or last summer rather. And we recorded our creation process for kind of coming up with the idea. We had a lot of ideas kind of in that initial thing, that some of them got abandoned, some of them got changed pretty significantly, and there's been a bunch of stuff that got added that we did not talk about the first time. So while the overall premise sort of stuck around, it morphed a lot throughout the process of creating that adventure. In terms of like how to get the characters involved with the plot, that's something that I worry about less, because I think that's the kind of thing that for me is going to happen organically at the table. I'm not going to sit down and be like, okay, well, Johnny's playing a paladin, so I need a paladin hook to get into this. I'm going to run a much more collaborative game anyway, so I'm going to figure that out at the table. I'm not going to do that ahead of time. Plan the encounters for sure. I definitely want to go ahead and say, if I'm running an adventure, I'm going to try to hit these 3 encounters, or at least these are the 3 encounters that I'm going to pull from. If encounter 1 takes a long time and I don't do encounter 2, but then I do encounter 3, that's totally cool too. But yeah, I do definitely have a plan for the encounters. And then bring it to an end. No, because like, again, that determines it's based a lot on how do the players interact with it? How do they succeed? How do those encounters go? Like, the myriad of possibilities for how that adventure is going to end, I can't necessarily plan for them. So that's kind of my thought on it.
Okay. Well, Leonie, anything you would add, change that?
So I think for me, the difference is, what's my venue? If I am
that's fair,
writing an adventure for a con or a one-shot for my local game store, and I do those pretty much the same way. So if I'm doing a one-shot, I will write that in a specific way. If it is an adventure, a homemade adventure or session that's part of a home campaign, I will write that a very different way. And this leans more towards what I do for one-shots or conventions than anything I do for my home game. And the reason really I say that is, in my home games or in my long-running campaigns, the characters are already there. So now I am writing an adventure for the character. So the individual adventure or individual premise isn't the start. I actually started with the characters in the homebrew scenario. The very first adventure in that campaign would be written very similarly to this, but every adventure from there to whatever I planned as the end conditions. To Josh's point, I can't tell you how they're going to end it, but I do have end conditions. I know what in a campaign my bad guys are going to do throughout the campaign. I know I'm going to add adventures in the way that are designed to give the players times to thwart, help, or alter the bad guys' plans. At the end, depending on how successful the players were, will determine the end. If the bad guys are out to destroy the world and the players go left instead of right every single time, their choice, their agency, to harken back to a previous episode we did together, then I know where it's going to end because they didn't do anything to stop the bad guys.
Yeah.
So I don't write the end. I write end condition probabilities. And then I let the game flow naturally with all the collaborative tools that Josh started in that home game campaign. In the one-shot scenario, it is about the premise. Because honestly, I have to throw the premise out to whoever's running the convention so I can get my table set up and get that done on time, which is not always my strongest suit. I'm always fairly last minute at getting those out. But so the premise is the first thing I have to have there. And as far as characters, I don't know what characters are going to have necessarily. As far as drawing in the character, me selecting what pre-gens I bring to the as an option comes in right there. And then same thing with planning encounters. That falls in right in line. So this is definitely a good one-shot or short campaign structure if you're writing it. Here's the thing. This is definitely creating. If I'm using written adventures, then this isn't necessary. But I will write encounters to bridge a pre-written adventure into the game I am running. Mm-hmm. And folks who play in our Patreon game, to give us a shameless plug for Star Trek Expeditions and the TTJ Patreon site, those who play in those games, I run a lot of pre-gen games or pre-written games, mostly from the STA Mission Breeze, but I alter everything to fit the campaign world that we have built through preservations at Tabletop Journeys. I do that with Star Trek Adventures at conventions also. Yep. I am always playing in the same world. I'm just altering a pre-written adventure. So that helps me on the premise end, but I still am building in the other things pretty much in this standard format. So I think it's very useful. I think they just didn't do a great job of explaining, here's what you do when you're making your own in a one-shot or limited fashion. We'll get to other stuff later.
Yeah, I think that's what I was struggling with. And again, I still think this is a good chapter. I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but I think this is very much I've never done this before at all. This is paint by color or paint by numbers. Like, absolutely, do 1, do 2, do 3, do 4. You will be able to get through your first adventure and maybe you can go from there. But if you're experienced, or especially if you're using a published adventure, I think there's some additional information that people need that's not in this. There's like this one little sidebar about, hey, if you're using a published adventure, but I almost feel like it needs its own section or again, give me a really good example of a sample adventure and walk me through it. Because for me, again, I'm not going to repeat everything Lee and Nika said, but like if I'm doing this for a convention, I bring the pre-gens and I leave a lot of blank spaces on pre-gens, but I will include the hook in the pre-gen. Yeah. You are a fighter. This is why you're here. You're the paladin. Yeah. So if I bring them to the table, that hook is built in, so I don't have to do that. And if I'm not using pre-gens and I need to do that, that's where session 0 comes in. I go to my table and say, hey, I'm going to try to run for a game for everybody. I've never done it before. You can create whatever characters you want with these stipulations. This is your level. This is whatever. And oh, by the way, we're all going to start in a small village that recently has been affected by like a sickness. People think it's because of the river water is polluted. So when you make your character, understand that's part of it. So that everybody makes a character that makes sense for. So I feel it's like it's almost too basic, but I would like a different sidebar for that. But I still think it's good. I love those D20 chapters, adventure situations. I was reading through there like, yep, I'm gonna write one for that. Yep, I'm gonna write one for that. So I don't know. I'm in the middle of writing one right now. So I was just, because this is not my process at all, but my process doesn't make any sense except to me. So it's not something we should talk about right now.
Well, so it's funny because I your point about one shots in campaign game and convention games is spot on, Lewanika. When I was first posed with the question, I was thinking more of like an adventure session as part of a larger campaign. You
Sure.
know what I mean? And you know what I mean? So I'm kind of like taking this as like, this is the first thing that you need to know before we start talking about chapter 5, which is how you take 20 adventures or 50 adventures and you put them together to go ahead and make them something bigger. But you're absolutely right. If you're writing a standalone adventure that's meant to be a silo unto itself, you know, I mean, you and I had this discussion just the other day about how like the adventure that we're writing is going to need pre-gens for exactly that reason. We need to go ahead and give people the hook so that they can just like pick this thing up, get, you know, and go. So,
yeah, I will be running this at our adventure at a Catacon next year. But just as much as that would be fun, what I would really love to see is one of our dear listeners also at a Catacon running it 2 tables away from me. So they're running it as well, because no 2 GMs run a game the same. And I don't know if they said that very well at any point in this book. Maybe they did, and I don't remember it. But no 2 GMs run any single adventure exactly the same. And that doesn't make either one of them good or bad. It really is based on what's happening at that table and in those moments, because players will make crazy decisions. And this group of players will make this crazy decision and this one that. That's excellent DM advice that I think would have certainly been expanded on or called out in a bigger fashion.
And the last thing I want to say, sorry, I have one more thing to say. Do you want to do it now?
Have at it.
Okay. The talking about random encounters. I never use random encounters in my games, but I will use random encounters in my planning stages. I might randomly roll up a combat, but I'm not going to do it in the middle of a game. I'm not going to be like sitting at the table going, oh, 2 owlbears walk up. No. Especially if you're a brand new DM, that is a quick way to get a TPK, because you will not have time to realize if that's balanced or not. So I would say I love random encounters for creating helping me get inspiration for things, but I am never going to do a roll on the table. Oh, now you're fighting 2 owlbears in a game. And also for the treasure, same thing. I'm not going to randomly decide in the moment that you find 57 gold. I'm going to do all of that beforehand. I might roll it randomly, but it's going to be my notes somewhere what I wrote. I'm not going to do it in the moment. I think that's bad table management if you're like looking at charts while stuff like that's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a very clear distinction. I use random encounters all the time in my exploration pillar. However, I have written them ahead of time, and so I know what the possibilities are. For and there's a variety of tactics that I use to go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to be talking about this in one of my vlog episodes as soon as I get, you know, some spare time to go ahead and talk about it. But basically, I do that all the time, and I love because I'm a big fan of the game within the game. I'm a big fan of the random aspects of the things that can just get totally wackadoodle when you're not planning it, and then the ability to kind of like streamline that into a story. But I like living on that edge. You talked about DM types and things, how DMs do things differently. I like that. That's the part of the game that I enjoy to run, is that when I feel like not everything is totally in my hands and I have to go ahead and kind of roll with it a little bit. That's what I find fun. So yeah, that was the only thing I was going to say there, is that I certainly use random encounters, but I also write them ahead of time. I would never use them from a book because for everything that you said. So
I will mirror that, but leaning into Josh's comment about random encounters, I absolutely love randomization within exploration pillar, but I plan for it. So for example, they're traveling, and we talked about the travel chart in our previous episode. We know there's 3 points. One of those points might be weather event, right? I would write 3 separate encounters for weather, and then I might roll it. So I will have 3 options, but I will know what those 3 options are. So I know that they're balanced. I know that they're engaging and fun. I know where the difficulty comes in for either of those. And if it's wonderful, glorious, it's wonderful warm weather, that usually means that encounter in that weather event is going to be dealing with people. If it is terrible, crazy weather, it's going to be a survival, exploration-y type piece within that environment. So for me, it is just like all 3 of us are on the same page, right? Have randomization, roll random things, but have it done in the planning stages, days, weeks, before you sit down at the table with your players. I do my best, other than flipping through my notes, to not have to open books while I run games. That's me. If I am looking through a book, I have lost my table. I am trying to keep eye, ear, and mouth vocal contact with my table.
Yep.
I guess the only other thing that I wanted to go ahead and talk about, and this is on page 117, kind of the monster behavior subchapter here. I thought that was fine. It was a little weird for me though. Like some of it just didn't totally, like the whole like monster relationships thing. Like I don't know. It seemed a little bit like something for a chapter that's designed for brand new DMs. It seemed like something that is something that I have never done before. Like I've never necessarily worried about how a monster wants to relate to the party in these sorts of terms. I think it was a little weird. It felt a little misplaced. And it just, I don't think it did a good enough job of saying like, here's a way that you can run monster relationships, but maybe that's kind of the conceit of the entire book, is that anything that's written in the book is
An option.
should be optional, right? Exactly.
Right.
If it resonates with you. But that in particular just kind of felt like I don't know. Having a monster have individual relationships with everybody in the party just seems like a way to divide up the party, not a way to actually create good story for that monster or the party. And so that it seemed really divisive, but potentially divisive.
I think they used a terrible term when they got into that point, because in that case, they're using monster lowercase m as in anything that's not a player.
Sure. So
it could have been an NPC, and it'd have been better if they didn't say monster and if they said NPC with a stat block.
Yeah.
Now that whole thing makes much more sense. So I believe they were really trying to universalize it, because some monsters are sapient and some are not. So any sapient monster, I think that information has much more weight and should be considered.
Sure.
Because a sapient monster may say, I respect somebody with strength. That barbarian, you don't want to come here. I don't want to have to kill you. Tell your people to go away. We're going to have a conversation before we throw down. I'm still going to throw down if you choose to do this, but I respect you, so I want to keep that out. And I think that can be very fun at the table. That is not the way they handled this here. And if they were trying to go in some other direction, I think they would have done much better to say, hey, one of the best books on the topic has ever been written. The monsters know what they're doing. Click this link here, go to there. We get an affiliate link. Not that Hasbro needs that, but that's a pie in the sky dream. But that has been done at a level that they are not going to hit in this book.
Exactly. And that was kind of exactly my point.
And so it's like, leave it alone. Don't pick it up. Say it exists. That's all you got to do.
Based on the examples, they give 6 examples. The way I'm reading these, it should be in a different part of the book about like alternate win conditions or how to make combat more interesting. Because for me, all of those are situations where if a player does something sneaky and is like overhears or pays attention, you could say, oh, actually these two monsters are acting this way, and they'd be, oh, we don't have to like kill everything on the field. If we kill that one, they'll all run away. Or maybe we need these two to fight each other. That makes like not really tactics, strategy in combat more interesting than just hit it with a stick till it dies. So it seems like it's just out of place, or to Lou and Nico's point, I think it's kind of like mistitled in a way. So that I think what it does is cool. I don't know how many people are going to get that from where it is and how it's presented.
Honestly, I spend enough time listening to and viewing other content creators and reading books about the craft of the game that I figured out what they were trying to do pretty quickly. But again, this is a book for newer GMs. If you've not spent years in this hobby, what are the odds about the monsters know what they're doing, or flea mortals? Or what are the odds that you've seen this topic discussed on Mastering Dungeons, Tabletop Journeys, the RPG Academy, all these other shows and our show, and we go into variants of this topic often here at Tabletop Journeys. This is not untouched ground. We have been to these shores many times, and I think a new GM, a new dungeon master wouldn't know that. And this is a bit of a disservice for that, because of the mistitling and because it doesn't really cover it. It is not a section within a chapter. This
Yep.
is a chapter or a book topic.
I will be making that exact same comment when we get into chapter 5. So we're going to wrap up chapter 4 here, unless there's anything else that you guys want to go ahead and say.
I'm good.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
well, thank you all for
solid.
listening. Yeah, thank you all for listening to chapter 4. We want to hear your thoughts, of course. What do we get right? What do we get wrong? What do you think? Please, subscribe, get notified when we release new episodes. They're going to be coming out periodically here throughout the next couple of weeks here. And we're going to jump over to chapter 5, creating campaigns. So we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, all.